Hello, hello. So I'm Natasha Jackson. I've been doing the growth mindset course with you. And of course, we had to stop due to COVID-19. But although you're not in the classroom right now, I know you're still teaching. So I did want to finish up just the last few chapters of our growth mindset book. Just going to condense it. I know each meeting before we spend an hour on a chapter, but I'm just going to condense the last 5 sessions into about an hour, a little bit longer. So obviously, we're not going to be having the discussion like we normally did because this is asynchronous. So just go ahead and take notes. And I'm going to share my screen so I can show you the PowerPoint presentation, and I will send it in a PDF format after everybody has watched it. Okay, so as I was saying, this is the growth mindset course, sessions 4 through 8. We're just going to condense it, and we're going to go through the last few chapters for the course. The book itself has 12 chapters, but again, because we started mid-year, we were just going to go through 7 of the chapters, so I'm still going to go through those 7 chapters. The other 5, I would encourage you to read them whenever you have some free time during the summer or whenever you can, because there's a lot of good content in there that you can use for the upcoming school year. All right, so again, I showed you this book earlier. We'll be using the Growth Mindset Coach book. There's also a lot of resources in the Ready to Use Resources for Mindset in the Classroom book. I am not going to use those in here just because, again, simply we're not having face-to-face interaction with students right now. So we're just not going to go into the actual resources, but please feel free to go through. If we go over a topic and you think that one of those resources is something you can use remotely or something you can use for the upcoming school year, then just feel free to bookmark any resources that you'd like to use in that book. All right, so this session's readings, again, going through 5 chapters at it's right now. So it's pages 53 through 116 of the Growth Mindset book. We're going to go through October through February. October is going to be talking about the brain and how it contracts and grows like a muscle. November is going to be talking about yourself as a valued member of this community, and also parents, teachers, faculty, colleagues, students, all of them, how they all come together to ensure that students learn. December, we love a challenge. It's going to be talking about learning how to challenge your students and differentiate instruction for them. January, feedback is a gift, accept it, showing different types of feedback that you can give to your students, different types of criticism. In February, a goal without a plan is just a wish. All right, so the first chapter we're going to be doing is chapter 3. Again, October, my brain is like a muscle that grows. So the objectives of this chapter are to teach yourself and your students about neuroplasticity and to test and develop brain-based teaching strategies. All right, so our changing brain. Oh, one thing I didn't mention. So at the end of this session, because we don't have, the interaction that we normally have and we can't take attendance, what I'm going to do is have a quiz. It's going to be through Google Forms. And so I'll send the link for that quiz, and it'll also be on the last slide or the second to last slide of this. And just click on it if you can. If not, I'll just say it out loud so you can just take down the web address and then go ahead and take the quiz whenever you get a chance. What I'm going to do to make it easy so that we're not hiding any information, the questions for the quiz are going to be in red. And so anything you see in red, I also sent a study guide. So you can use that study guide and just fill in the blanks or take down the information. Those are going to be the exact same questions that you'll find on the quiz. There are going to be 20 questions, 4 questions from each of the 5 chapters that we're reviewing in this session. Okay, so as you see the first this first slide, it does have information in red. That's going to be the first question on the quiz. So our changing brain. So humans, of course, with dedicated effort and practice are capable of making incredible, long-lasting changes to our brain throughout our lifetime. And they give 3 examples. So people who are born deaf, their brains actually rewire. So the part of the brain that's typically reserved for processing sound and hearing, it instead helps to assist with processing touch and vision. So that's why people who are deaf have heightened sense of touch and vision, and people who are blind have heightened sense of hearing. The brain automatically rewires itself so that those senses can expand and grow, even though the other senses may not work as well. Another example, Cameron Mott is someone who had half of her brain removed at the age of 4 due to a disease, and her brain ended up rewiring itself so that half of her brain works like the whole brain. We also have examples where the hippocampi, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for memory of London cab drivers, ended up growing as they memorized over 25,000 streets in order to pass the city's cab licensing examination. So that's one example. All right, so one of the lessons that they give are, one second. Okay, so they give a lesson plan to help students understand the brain, and I think this would be a cool lesson plan to do with some of your students. And again, as with everything in this book, a lot of the lesson plans, they're not differentiated. Like they probably are catered towards, I would say, 4th or 5th grade students or somewhere around that grade level. So if you have younger students or older students, like feel free to just rework this lesson plan in a way that would best fit your students. So on page 57 of the book is where the lesson plan starts. And the objective is to explain the different parts of the brain. And so what the students do is they make a Play-Doh model of the brain, and they ended up putting it on paper or however and labeling it. Again, this might be too advanced for maybe, you know, kindergartners or 1st graders. So maybe, you know, instead of labeling the parts, they could do something else. But feel free to change this up as you would like. But all they would really need is Play-Doh and paper and something to write with. All right, so the brain lesson plan, how you would start is you go through each of the different parts of the brain with your students. So for example, the cerebrum, you would start like, quick, what's 2 + 2? And then you tell your students if you were able to answer that question, you were using your cerebrum part of the brain. And that's the biggest part of the brain, and it's used for thinking. Then you would have them construct the cerebrum using whatever color Play-Doh you have assigned for that section, and then they would put it on their paper. Then you would go on to the next section, the cerebellum. And you would ask them, give their neighbor a high five. Once they give their neighbor a high five, you would let them know the reason you were able to do that is because of the cerebellum. That's the part of our brain that controls our muscles. But again, the next part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that's under the skin and bone on our forehead. And it's the part of our brain that's in charge of making decisions. You can let students know, you know, whether you decide to make good or bad choices, it all comes from the prefrontal cortex. And again, this is in red. That's the next question that is on your study guide, the next question that is on the quiz. So you can go ahead and make sure you take that down. The next section of the brain is the hippocampus. And you can ask them, you know, how do you know your way around the playground? How do you know your way around the school? How do you know how to get to school every day? For some kids who do know how to get to school every day. And they can attribute that to their hippocampus because that's the part of the brain that's responsible for our memory. The next section for the amygdala, you can ask them, you know, how are you feeling today? No matter how you feel, if you're happy, sad, you know, things happen. All of that comes from the amygdala. That's the part of the brain that controls our emotions. And the last part of the brain you would have them construct is the brainstem. And you can ask them, you know, have you ever wondered how our bodies know how to breathe while we're sleeping? It's because of our brainstem. Our brainstem is responsible for involuntary functions like breathing, sneezing, digesting food, and other things like that. So again, as you're going through the different parts of the brain, you can have them make it out of Play-Doh or some other resource that you have, or even just draw it, or you can even, I'm sure there's, you know, different templates online. You can cut it out, have them color it if it's younger kids, and put it all together and just go over, you know, this is how you learn, and these are the different parts of our brain that's responsible for learning. And that's the Meet Your Brain lesson plan. And there's another lesson plan in this chapter, and it talks about the brain plasticity. And it's on page 65 of our growth mindset books. The objective of this lesson plan is to explain the way we learn new things and grow our brains. And this time they'd be creating a neuron model from Neuralseeds. So they would watch the neuron model from Neuralseeds on YouTube, and then you would either need Twizzlers, the kind that peels apart, or Wiki Sticks, pipe cleaners. You can look at the picture and see something, doesn't matter, different colors that you would be able to use that and make it. And again, this might be a little advanced for the younger kids, but you can figure out a way to differentiate so that you can still do something similar with your students if you have one of the younger grades. All right, so with this lesson plan, you're going to instruct your students to think of something new they've been introduced to. And then they're going to add a Twizzler as one part of the neuron. Then they're going to add another Twizzler, whatever you decide to use, section to represent learning practice like homework or different things that help build on that skill. Then they're going to add another one to represent mistakes and challenges that they may have encountered as they were trying to perfect that skill. And then they're going to add another section to represent the application of that skill. So whenever they encountered something and was able to make connections to, you know, their daily life, if they encountered something in class, they were able to connect it to something outside of school, they would add another Twizzler for that. And they can come up with other ways to strengthen their axon by adding more Twizzlers, and then they're going to label the neuron. That's the second activity they give in this chapter. Okay, and as you're going through, you can go over the different parts of the neuron with your students. We have the dendrites. They're responsible for receiving incoming messages from other cells and sending them to the cell body. Again, that's in red, which means that's the next question on our study guide. Cell bodies, they generate electrical signals to send the information to other cells. Axons, that's how information travels away from the cell body toward the presynaptic terminal. And then we have the presynaptic terminal, and that's how information moves between there and the dendrites of another neuron using chemical signals. And the book also gives some brain boosting activities, which I'm sure plenty of you use a lot. One that's not in here that I know that people have used before, Go Noodle. Go Noodle has a lot of activities for students to get them out their seats. Human Knot, I think a lot of us have done it before, where everybody holds hands and they go in a circle, and then they have to figure out a way to undo the knot without actually letting go hands. Air writing, have the students stand up, ask them a series of questions. It can be, you know, relevant to your content that you've been teaching or just for fun. And they're going to answer by writing in the air with their finger. You have a junk drawer. This is a game that was featured on Whose Line Is It Anyway? You keep a bag full of just random things, you know, spatula, foam finger, pipe cleaners, and just ask students to reach into the bag, pull out an item, and then come up with an inventive way to use the item that was not intended, like that's not its intended use. For example, a pool noodle can become a prosthetic elephant trunk. So we can just see how students can use their imagination with that game. Yoga break, you know, taking a break just to do some in-class yoga. And then YouTube brain breaks. Again, it's similar to Go Noodle. There's a ton of videos online that you can use to just give your students a break and stretch their brains. All right, and so that's going to be it for chapter 3. Again, we're going to be moving a little bit fast so we can get through all 5 chapters. So our next chapter, chapter 4, is November. I am a valued member of this learning community. The objectives of this chapter are to develop strategies to build relationships with students, develop strategies to build relationships with parents, and develop strategies to build relationships with colleagues. Okay, so why do relationships matter? Teachers who offer appropriate targeted praise can foster a growth mindset in their students. And the best way to affect the mindsets of the students, colleagues, and parents is in laying a foundation on which strong relationships can be built. And we all know that the most important part of, you know, teaching is first building rapport with the students and building rapport with their parents and of course your colleagues, so that you can be as effective as possible. So here's a relationship self-assessment. I want you to pause it just for a few seconds, probably about 60 seconds, and just go ahead and ask yourself these questions. If you can write it down, write it down. If not, I just want you to keep a tally in your head, a mental note of how many yeses and how many no's you have. Okay, and so you should have gotten a tally. If you said no to most of those statements, it is likely that you have a growth mindset approach to networking and making connections with your students, parents, and colleagues. If you said yes to at least 3 questions, then you're going to need to be extra intentional about developing meaningful relationships with students and other school stakeholders. And I know some of the things I mentioned, like for example, you know, telling students about your personal life or different things like that, it's you have to have, you know, a balance when you're teaching. But for the most part, if you said yes to 3 or more of those questions, then you're just going to have to be extra intentional about developing those relationships. All right, so growth-oriented student-teacher relationships. So there's 5 cornerstones that the book mentions. The first one is that students know that the teacher has faith in their ability to achieve. And if you expect your students to have faith in themselves to grow, they're going to have a sense that you genuinely and enthusiastically believe in them too. So, you know, remind students daily that you believe in their ability to achieve, and whether it's through process praise on a task, well done, or detailed improvement feedback, there are chances to practice this every single day. The next cornerstone is students respect and like their teacher as a person. So the best way to create deeper relationships with your students is to take a personal interest in their lives and well-being. So ask them about their out-of-school interests. And we also know that's a great way to differentiate instructions. You know, use one of those. They have several different templates that I've seen on Teachers Pay Teachers, and just online, where at the beginning of the school year, you ask your students about their favorite color, you know, things they're interested in, their favorite hobbies. Are they involved in any out-of-school extracurricular activities? Different things like that, just to better get to know your students, to understand why they may not be doing their homework, you know, on Wednesday nights, maybe because they have, you know, a game or something, although obviously homework comes first, but different things like that to help be better relatable for your students. And sometimes you might have issues where, you know, they mentioned in the book, students' parents might be getting divorced, students might be dealing with illnesses or diagnoses, students might have a parent who may be absent or in prison. You know, these are things we never get to know unless you actually engage in conversation with your student that's not necessarily content related. All right, and of course, as I mentioned before, sharing appropriate personal information with your students, like perhaps how you struggled with Algebra 2, or what you plan on doing over the weekend, or just, you know, the pets you have, simple things like that, not getting too much into your personal life, but simple things like that will help the students feel like they better understand you as a person. All right, so the next cornerstone is that students seek and embrace the teacher's feedback. So make it clear to students that their growth is your main priority, and let them know that the purpose of constructive feedback is to help them improve. You're not trying to make them feel bad about themselves. You just want them to improve. And whenever you can, just take a break and have a one-on-one chat with them to explain the feedback, instead of, you know, bashing them in front of other students or explaining that in front of other students. The next cornerstone that's mentioned is that students know that grades are less important than growth. So we all know that grades are important. And most students, you know, try their best. You know, they have parents pushing them and they want to get the best grades possible, but they have to know that grading is a part of the process and a source of data that you use to track their overall performance. But they also recognize that the most important thing to do, and the most important thing for you, is their progression toward the goals you've set together. The next cornerstone is that students feel safe with their teacher. And we know that when children feel more secure at school, they are more prepared to learn. Students should know unequivocally that you want what's best for them, you'll protect them, and you'll unconditionally care for them no matter what mistakes they make. We know in a growth mindset, mistakes are valued as learning opportunities. All right, this chapter also mentions a few relationship building strategies. It asks you to find common ground with your students, take time at the beginning of the school year to get to know your students on a personal level. And we mentioned that already, lunch buddies. You know, you can schedule individual lunch dates with your students, or even, you know, 2 students, have them come to your room and then schedule a lunch date, or, you know, sometimes eat in the cafeteria with your students, however you do it, just to schedule some time to get to know your students. 2-minute check-ins before school, after school, or during breaks. Make it your goal to approach a student who may be someone who is struggling and talk to them for about 2 minutes about just non-school related topics. Just say yes. Make it a point to say yes to students' requests as often as you can. And again, this is within reasonable means. For example, you know, can I use a green colored pencil on this assignment, or something like that? You know, it might go longer than you think. So voice and choice is an excellent motivator. Next thing, meet them at the door. An oldie but a goodie. Try to personally greet each of your students as they come in each day. Get to know you activities. Take time out, especially at the beginning of the year, to engage students in different activities that can help your class bond. Morning meeting, and different things like that are also good. Hand signals and code words, instead of yelling at your students, sit down or be quiet, try to establish some hand signals or code words at the beginning of the year that will communicate these and other common instructions for your students. Golden rule teaching. We all know about the golden rule. Treat students the way you want to be treated, and then your students will treat you the way they want to be treated and treat others the way they want to be treated. So that's fair. And forget the shop talk. So make an effort to talk to students about non-school related subjects whenever possible. Find out what type of extracurricular activities they're participating in, and then use that to your advantage whenever you're asking them questions. And again, I know these are things that most of you, I'm sure, do already. Okay, so this chapter also mentions the different types of classrooms. And so we're aiming for the nurtured classroom for students. You want them to, again, feel comfortable and feel that they trust you when they come into the classroom. They want to be in a safe and nurturing environment. Does that mean you have to throw all your rules out the window? Absolutely not. Does that mean you have to coddle students and handle their self-esteem with little kid gloves or walk on eggshells? Not at all. Okay, it means that in order for students to get down to the real business of learning with all its mistakes, failures, and pitfalls, it's going to have to be done in a nurturing environment. So they're not afraid of getting questions wrong. They're not afraid of being wrong sometimes, and that they're in a healthy environment where they can learn. So these are the different ones: the coddled classroom, the nurtured classroom, and the disconnected classroom. And again, we're aiming for the nurtured classroom. In a coddled classroom, mistakes are overlooked and they have no real consequences because you don't want to hurt any kid's feelings. So, they do things and you just kind of let them pass by. In a nurtured classroom, mistakes are learning opportunities followed by second or sometimes even third chances. In the disconnected classroom, mistakes result in disciplinary action and or loss of arbitrary points. The coddled classroom, you have students who love their teacher because he or she lets them do whatever they want. We know that's probably not happening. The nurtured classroom, students love the teacher because he or she encourages them to challenge themselves and is responsive to student needs. In the disconnected classroom, students view the teacher as an authoritarian figure or a gatekeeper. The coddled classroom, teacher believes some students just aren't cut out for some subjects, and that's okay. They can't do it, they just can't do it. The nurtured classroom, the teacher believes that with effort and practice, every student can make achievement gains in any discipline. In the disconnected classroom, the teacher believes as long as they pass the test, who cares? Nothing else matters. The coddled classroom, students are helpless and need to be closely managed throughout the learning process. In the nurtured classroom, again, this is in red, this is the next question. For this chapter, students manage their own learning and are encouraged to take risks. Teacher serves as a facilitator and a guide. In the disconnected classroom, students do what the teacher says. If they don't, they're non-compliant. If they do, they're good students, and that's it. All right, the next thing that this chapter discusses is building positive relationships with the students. So we talked about building positive relationship with our students, getting to know our students, especially at the beginning of the school year. Now we're discussing building positive relationships with the parents. So this is the next question, which is in red, the next question on our study guide. Effective communication with parents does not have to be protracted face-to-face conference in order to make a difference. Short text messages to parents once a week can have a significant effect on the achievement of at-risk students. You can also send growth messages to parents. We discussed this in one of our previous meetings, one of our previous sessions. They do have some examples in the book, again, on page 89. Oh, sorry, I went too fast, but some examples they give are remind and different ways that you can interact with parents. I know that you guys said that everybody uses Class Dojo, so Class Dojo is the perfect way to keep parents involved with their students' education and to keep in contact with parents. And of course, we also have email and different ways. They also mentioned Zoom and different programs like that, which of course I'm sure now everybody has become a professional on that, simply because we have had to due to everything that's going on right now. Sorry, I was trying to go back to this slide. So remind, newsletters. Again, I remember giving out newsletters every every Monday, just so the parents knew, you know, what letter sounds you were working on, what was coming up for this week, if there were any birthdays that made the kids feel special, if there were any field trips or anything coming up, any deadlines. I think that's a good way to keep your parents up to date each week, or maybe even each month if you just want to send home a newsletter. And I know usually there's a school-wide newsletter, but it also helps if you have even a grade-wide newsletter or a class-wide newsletter that you can send home. Social media, kind of wary about that. They mentioned in the book having hashtags that you can post and the parents can go and see what your kids are doing. But again, we're all kind of skeptical about putting kids on social media, so I'm not sure if we do that. But e-conferences is what I mentioned. We're using Zoom, and different programs like that can help if parents, there's some parents who may not have vehicles and may not have a way to physically come to the school, but for the most part, you may find that most parents can keep their phone on, you know, long enough to be able to download a Zoom app or have some kind of conference with you, even if they can't physically come in. And I know we didn't really think too much about that before that, but I mean, before this whole COVID-19, but now I feel like that might become more common, is having e-conferences with parents. Having a class channel, they mentioned that, polls and surveys with your students, KidBlog or Seesaw, those are different apps that allow students to share their learning by blogging about activities, challenges, mistakes, and successes they experience in the classroom. They can look at it at the end of the school year and see how much they've grown throughout the school year. And then Adobe Voice encourages students to create simple presentations to share their learning, so they can share this with their parents. They can upload photos, text, and audio to a presentation and share it through email with their parents. Okay, and then we mentioned relationship with students, relationships with parents, and now relationships with your colleagues. This is the last question in this chapter. When teachers build strong relationships with their colleagues, it benefits the entire school culture. There's different ways to improve relationships with and learn from your colleagues. Mentoring, it's always great to have teachers who have been in the game for years and years to help mentor you. And sometimes even the ones who have been there for years and years can learn a few things from maybe the newer colleagues. So it's always good to do that. No matter what, there's someone in your building, someone in your grade level who has something of value to share with you. And there's also so much that you can share with them. Seek out them. Don't turn down opportunities to mentor others either. It's a chance to share and reflect on your best teaching practices. And you'll probably learn a thing or two in the process as well. We also have PLCs, professional learning communities. If you're already involved in one, try to take an active role. You'll have many opportunities to learn from and collaborate with other teachers and share your learning about the growth mindset. We have committees. It's always good to join committees when you're in a school setting, and to have parents, join in on those committees as well. You can learn a lot that way. We have project-based learning, PBL planning. They allow your students to work on collaborative skills during a lengthy project, and it gives teachers a chance to collaborate as well. We also have cooperative teaching, co-teach with some other teachers. If you guys are working on a skill and you saw something that works well for another teachers, you might want to have your students come in that classroom sometimes to do science experiments or things like that. It always helps. Book clubs, choose an education themed book each quarter for teachers. And then you can read it, meet, and discuss your feelings about the book, kind of similar to this with the growth mindset. Build interpersonal relationships. So communication between teachers doesn't have to be all shop talk. Make sure to have cordial conversations with colleagues about their personal lives. Bonding over a shared love of a band or baseball team, or inquiries about family or hobbies can go a long way in building a friendly rapport. All right, and we are on the next chapter, which is chapter 5, December. We love a challenge. The objectives in this chapter are to teach students the difference between equity and equality, develop strategies to challenge all students responsibly, and set and communicate high expectations of all students. So there's a formula for growth that the book mentions, and it tells us that challenge is at the crux of the growth mindset. Without it, students don't get the opportunity to take risks, learn to fail, and figure out how to pick themselves up again. They have to be challenged. Get creative in your lesson planning and curriculum design to make sure that every student in your classroom is sufficiently challenged. And here is the formula that it gives, which is the first question for this chapter on the study guide: nurturing environment plus challenging work plus high expectations lead to growth. Now I'll pause a second in case you need to take that down. All right, and so of course we've all seen this image before, and it talks about equity versus equality. And so of course we see in the first picture to the left, equality is where everybody gets the same size crate. It looks like a crate they're standing on. We see, of course, the dad can see. The younger son can also see barely, but the smallest son is unable to see anything, even with that crate beneath him. And the next picture, we see the dad gives his crate to the youngest son. Now he has two, dad doesn't have any, but they're all on the same level playing level. They all can see. I've also seen a recent one of these that adds in a third category, where they just completely remove the fence. All right, so here's the next question on our study guide. Equity is the quality of being fair. Equality is the quality of being equal. And we learned that through that image. So there's an equity versus equality lesson plan they include in this chapter that you can do with your students at the beginning of the school year to help them understand why sometimes you might, have small groups, and some groups might be doing something different from other groups, or sometimes you might pull out certain students for different reasons. This might help, especially if you have gifted curriculum or something like that. It might help just to help them better understand. So on page 101, it tells you the objectives for this lesson plan. It's to explain the difference between equality and equity and demonstrate the difference between equality and equity. And what they use is a bowl of M&Ms or Skittles, some other small snack, and then likely the picture that we just saw. You would probably want to show that to your students as well. How it works is that you're going to distribute one piece of small candy to your students, so one Skittle or one M&M, distribute it to your students, and then you're going to explain to them that that was equality. Everybody got the same number of candies, everybody got one, or everybody got two, whatever you decide to get to your students, and that's it. Everybody's equal, we all got the same thing. And then you're going to have the students write down statements. They can work in groups or alone, and they can write down statements on an index card about why they would need fewer or more pieces of candy. So you can split your class down right in half, have this half write down why they would need more candy, the other half write down why they might need fewer candy. So for example, one of the students might say, I need fewer because I just had a big lunch and I ate enough and I'm full. Or somebody might say, I might need more candy because I never had breakfast this morning, something like that. Then you're going to take those index cards, collect them from the students, and redistribute them. So based on what the student has on their card, when you come around to them again, you're going to say, do you need any more Skittles or do you not need any more Skittles? So based on what they had on the card, if their card said, I had a big lunch, I am not hungry, they're going to tell you, no, it's okay, I don't need any more. And then based on this assignment, you pass the candy out again, and then again, they request or refuse candy based on the statement on their cards. And you can explain to them that that was equity. Although some students may now have one, some students may have three, it's different because everybody's needs are different. Okay, so differentiation. They provide this chart in the book, and it goes through the different strategies, the description, and the types of differentiation. So the strategies for level text in your classroom libraries, you want to offer text at various complexity levels so that you can cater to your low readers as well as your high readers. This is differentiating the content. Again, that's in red. That's our next question on the study guide. Then you have audio-visual strategies, and it offers different vehicles for delivering content, like videos, podcasts, tutorials. You might be able to see what works different for different students, differentiating, again, the content. Then you might have graphic organizers, offer an array of organizers for learning new information, organizing schema, again, differentiating the content. Then we have ways to differentiate the process, and that's chunking, breaking down complex tasks into manageable sections or chunks. Sometimes students might need you to to tell them, this is what you're going to do first. Once you're done with that, check in with me, or, get a checklist, check that off, then do the next step, check that off. And some students might be able to go straight through. So chunking is a great way to differentiate the process. Manipulatives. Sometimes students might need hands-on manipulatives so they can physically interact with the learning. I remember when I was first learning the basics of algebra with, 2x plus something equals y. Whenever you learn that, I remember using hands-on manipulatives, and it made it so much easier for me to understand that concept, especially when it came to negatives. When we had red blocks or green blocks, it just made it a lot easier for me to understand. So I think hands-on manipulatives can definitely help some students. And some students, again, may be able to just have a piece of pencil and a paper and be able to be fine, without using manipulatives. So I think that's another way to help differentiate the process. Jigsaw learning. And this is the next question on our study guide, is when students work to complete assigned tasks within a group and each member contributes to learning. So you might have one kid who is responsible for reading something out loud, one kid's responsible for writing something down and taking notes, one kid is responsible for presenting, or it could be that, maybe they're all responsible for that, but one person is responsible for, one paragraph, or, depending on whatever topic or whatever subject, one problem. And then they all come back together and they present to the class as a whole, each of their different sections that they did in the group. And again, that's a way to differentiate the process. They can pick a problem that they understand, or they can work with the other students to help them better understand, so that when they present it to the class, they're actually able to do that effectively. Then we have two ways to differentiate the product, which is what the students will actually share. We have assignment options, so you can allow students to have a choice in how they demonstrate their learning. So they can write a poem, perform a skit, write a report, different ways that they can differentiate. If they're learning about, Black History Month, or just learning about, famous people, somebody might want to just share a poem, they learned from, Langston Hughes. Somebody might want to perform a skit of some specific instance in Harriet Tubman's life or something, and somebody might want to just write a report. So having them, just giving them that flexibility will help differentiate your instruction. And again, varying your rubrics. I know a lot of times it's just easier to just have a one-size-fits-all rubric, and we can just give it to all students, and that's that. But again, that doesn't account for the differences in learning. So differentiating your rubric can also help differentiate your instruction. And that's it for chapter 5, and we will move on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is January, feedback is a gift, accepted. There's 3 objectives in this chapter. 1 is to distinguish between person praise and process praise. 2, develop strategies for giving effective feedback. 3, teach students how to use effective feedback when conferencing with their peers. So a better way to praise, person praise versus process praise. Both of these are our first 2 questions, question 1 and question 2 on the study guide for chapter 6. Person praise, it focuses on a student's personal traits and qualities like intelligence, and it sends them a message that they succeeded because of some inherent inborn quality that they possess, not the effort they put into a task. You are smart, you are just amazing, you are great, pretty much you were born that way. It doesn't matter how much effort you put in, you're just good at it. Process praise, on the other hand, it acknowledges the effort, for students who may be doing well or students who may not be doing well. It's acknowledging their effort, the strategies, and their action that contributed to their success of a task. Here are some examples of person praise. So you're a natural at math. Instead of saying that, something else that might help students to better appreciate the process are, for example, these problems didn't give you much of a challenge. Let's move on to something that will really help stretch your brain. Person praise, you're so smart. And I know we all want to say that to our students sometimes because it makes them feel so good, but a better way of saying that might be, I like how you use different strategies to figure out these problems, or man, you sure worked really hard to get those problems right. Person praise, you're such a good boy, you're such a good student. Process, I appreciate that you cleaned up the art center without being asked, or I appreciate that you walked away from the situation, instead of letting it escalate. Person praise, what a brilliant artist. Instead of that, process praise. Your effort in learning to paint is apparent in your beautiful picture. Person praise, you're a born writer. Process praise, your writing shows that you understand the value of word choice. Or I like the way that you organize your story. I like the way that you use quotation marks correctly when you were showing the dialogue in your stories. There's different ways to praise the process, letting students know that, it's the process that really matters and not just, some inherent ability, inborn ability that they have. All right, so with the better way to praise, there's also a better way to critique students. And so we have the same thing. There's person critique versus process critique. So person critique is feedback that blames a failure or a setback on a quality of the person. And process critique, it focuses on the effort or lack thereof put into the task. Here are some examples of person critique and process critique. So person critique, you might tell a student, you really messed this up. Process critique, this didn't seem to work out for you. How could you approach this problem differently the next time? Person critique, you did your best, but it just was not good enough. Process critique, you didn't meet your goal, but what did you learn in the process? Person critique, maybe piano just is not your thing. Process, keep practicing. Every day you get close to mastering this. And last one, person critique, you're such a naughty boy. Process critique, you made a bad choice. What will you do differently in the future? This chapter also talks about vague versus specific praise. Non-specific feedback is the lack of context. It doesn't address what the student has done well. If you're going to put a sticker proclaiming good job on a piece of student work, make sure it's accompanied by some effective feedback in the form of a short note or a verbal comment describing what exactly was good about the work in terms of process. We don't want students just to think, oh yeah, I did great because I got a 100, because maybe they might get an 85, but they still did well because they were good at showing their work. They just missed one little number in the process of completing a few problems. So it's good to give specific praise instead of just vague praise. So here are a few more examples. Vague praise, you're awesome. Specific praise would be, you're putting awesome effort in on this fraction assignment. Vague praise, good work. Specific praise, good work writing a detailed essay. Vague praise, well done. Specific praise, well done on your dance recital. I can see that you've practiced a lot. Vague praise is great. Specific praise, great strategy. That took some creative problem solving. So again, we just see expanding and letting them know that it's the process that counts, and letting them know that you actually saw something specific that you really liked about their work. All right, and then we are on to our last chapter, the last chapter we're going to cover, which is chapter 7, February, A Goal Without a Plan is Just a Wish. There are 4 objectives in this chapter. 1, to understand how the personal quality of grit influences mastery. 2, guide students to research real-world examples of grit. 3, distinguish between performance goals and learning goals. And 4, help students develop performance goals and learning goals. Here's the first question that's on the study guide. We discussed the difference between performance goals and learning goals. So performance goals are designed to make the student look smart and capable. Learning goals, on the other hand, are designed to help the student learn regardless of their performance. So it's not all about the outcome. We're trying to make sure that they're learning in the process, during the process. So the only goals that lead to mastery are learning goals. The book mentions the target system, and it has 6 aspects or dimensions of classroom environment that lead to either performance-oriented or learning-oriented classroom goal structures, depending on how you use them. Those dimensions are task, authority, recognition, grouping, evaluation, and time. And if you want to take those down, you can go ahead and just pause this right here so you can take down those. That is the next question in our study guide. All right, so I'm going to go over each one of these specifically. Task, it goes over the types of learning tasks that the students are assigned, the rigor, engagement, and value inherent to the task. So we see two different ways to use tasks in your classroom. You have in a performance-oriented classroom, tasks are going to be considered too easy by the students and often include performance tasks like rote memorization and demonstration of math facts, which we all know, especially in third grade and second grade, whenever you're learning the multiplication facts. So, note cards are great. But you also have to have some personalization of the task and engage your students. In a learning-oriented classroom, students are going to work on challenging tasks that offer equity and variety in process and product. And they're going to be of high interest to the students. Students are going to find meaning and value in the tasks that are assigned. The next one is authority. With authority, it includes the role of students as decision makers and directors of learning and their role in the classroom leadership task. Again, this is all to an extent. Obviously, the teacher has the ultimate authority in the classroom, but students should have some authority. So in a performance-oriented classroom, the teacher is going to provide clear directives on tasks. There's going to be little input from students. The teacher is seen as the leader. In a learning-oriented classroom, the learning is sometimes even student-led. You see students up at the chalkboard or up at the smart board and answering problems, sharing information, teaching students. They're also empowered to make decisions about learning tasks, and they're empowered to take leadership in their learning. Recognition. This includes how and why students receive recognition. So in a performance-oriented classroom, students are incentivized and recognized for turning in flawless work, following rules, finishing work efficiently. Taking risk and developing creative strategies are not going to be encouraged in these classrooms. Again, we're just looking at the outcome. We're not really paying attention to the process. In the learning-oriented classroom, students are incentivized and recognized for demonstrating effort, improving their skills. So although they may not have gotten 100, they increased 20 points since the last time they took their spelling test or their reading test. That's going to be praised in a learning-oriented classroom. And they're also going to be praised for accomplishing their learning goals. These students are going to be encouraged to take risks and develop creative strategies. It's going to be encouraged. The next letter in our target system is the G, and that's for grouping. And it includes how students are grouped together in collaborative learning. In a performance-oriented classroom, the groups are going to be homogeneous. You're going to have all of the high kids together, all of the low kids together. However, in a learning-oriented classroom, you're going to have heterogeneous groups. You're going to use those strategies to combine different learning styles, strategies, and levels to be able to encourage students to engage in deep collaboration with each other. E, evaluation. This is also the next question on our study guide. Evaluation includes how the teacher assesses student work process and products and evaluation procedures, which ones are in place. In a performance-oriented classroom, there's no equity in assessment and evaluation. It's probably going to be done publicly with the focus on how students perform in relationship to one another. In a learning-oriented classroom, evaluation of students is varied, and it's going to be done in a private fashion. Individual progress is going to be assessed with the focus on individual improvement and progress toward mastery. So I don't want to be better than Billy. I just want to be better than I did last week or better than I was doing last month. And to me, that's a gain. And the last letter in the target system is the T, which is time. And this includes how the teacher plans class time and how it is used to complete tasks. So in a performance-oriented classroom, time limits are strictly enforced. There's going to be little deviation from the original plan. Students are not going to be given variation in time limits to complete tasks because of their differences in learning, pace, or place. And you just want them to be quick and efficient. That's going to be valued over mastery. In a learning-oriented classroom, students are going to be encouraged to work at their own pace, within means, again. The schedule can be easily adapted to address gaps or allow for enrichment or remediation, and mastery is valued over quickness. So for example, you might have students who finish an assignment really quickly, and you might be able to have something else for them to do once they're done. You might also have students who take a long time to finish work. And again, once we get into these standardized tests, they're going to be timed. So again, within reason, you can give them extra time. Some might need accommodations, but again, learning how to address that and to adapt your learning instruction to allow all of the students to be able to succeed. All right, so I know that was a bit quick. We didn't really expand or go into the lesson as we normally do, but we had to get through all 5 chapters. So our application is going to be a quiz for this one. So this is the website you need to go to. It's https://forms.gle/6dj7CXBE6OYG11M9. Again, you should be getting this in an email. You should have already gotten it in an email. If you did get an email, you probably had it open and you were taking the quiz as we were going through this, which is probably a little bit helpful. If not, you have your study guide now. Your study guide, you went through all the questions. Just use your study guide. It's the same exact questions on the quiz and just complete the quiz. That's the first part of the application. We also have a second part of the application. And this is the action plan. The action plan, I want you to write down or type up one growth mindset lesson plan that you plan on using next year. This can be one of the ones we went over this session with the brain and the neurons, one of those, or you can pick one of the ones that we have done in the past in one of our lessons, or just go back through the growth mindset book. Again, we didn't get through all of the chapters. So you can pick a lesson plan that you found in a different chapter that you want to be able to use in your classroom next year. And again, some of these lesson plans are kind of advanced, or some of them might be, a little below your grade level. Discuss how you plan on using it in your class next year and how you will differentiate it for your students. Another part of your action plan, I want you to plan on helping your students develop a growth mindset next year. Just tell me how you plan on doing that. Just list some steps that you plan on using. Maybe, again, some of the activities we use in here or some of the resources in your resource book. How can you use that to help your students develop a growth mindset next year? And then finally, I want you to list some of the current strategies that you are using to foster relationships with your students, parents, and colleagues. And then I want you to think about how you can improve that next year. Again, everyone has room on improvement. So I know a lot of people may be doing a really good job in developing relationships with their students, parents, and colleagues, but maybe you had one student who you just couldn't form that connection with this year, one parent that you just couldn't get in contact with. Just think about different ways that you can improve on that next year. And I want you to email it to yourself or save it to your computer and then just revisit that in August. And as always, here's my contact information, Natasha Jackson. The email address is admin@iamstemcamps.com. So if you have any issues with the quiz, and once you're done with the quiz, it'll give you the score automatically. You can just take that number down. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, give me a call. And again, it's been great. I hope everybody learned a lot with this growth mindset. Again, if you have any time during the summer, if you have any free time, just feel free to actually read the growth mindset book because it has a lot of good strategies in there that you can use. Otherwise, everybody stay safe and enjoy the rest of your school year.